Hello and welcome to this presentation by Webcheck Security, creating an Agile security program. I'm Ben Card and I'm a CISO and FISO. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, also a fractional information security officer, through which I consult with organizations that may not have the inclination or the means to have a full-time CISO on staff. I'm able to step in and help them accomplish their security objectives and step back out and not require a 401k. Today, we're going to go through a series of tips and guidelines that I put together to try to help you to streamline your security program, reduce the level of effort that will be required, especially over time and a very rapidly changing security landscape. First of all, the agenda. We're going to try to establish some common ground, make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'll go through the why, what, how with examples, and the who of how to accomplish this feat of agility. A bit about myself, my background. I started my career as an intelligence special agent with the military, served overseas, working at force protection and intelligence collection, and then returned to work in the private sector using those same skills and focusing on the East Coast of the United States out of the Washington, D.C. area. Worked in application development with focus on security, compliance auditing at the Pentagon. I worked as a forensic specialist on collection teams for the FDIC. This was following the 2008 financial crisis, and we did quite a bit of collection for banks that were no longer able to continue to do business. And, then went on to penetration testing and decided at that point to join an organization for the long term. And so moved to work as the CISO for CISSP Corporation, based in the Silicon Slopes in Utah as a CISO. And then through the connections that I had, it was brought as an opportunity for me to start working as a FISO and performing penetration testing as a consultant, which I sat there to do to maintain my skills and help organizations beyond just the primary with which I was assisting. So first of all, trying to establish the common ground in language and landscape, it's important to understand that when you're looking at a security program, it can be called many different things. It can be called an ISMS in the ISO 27001 terminology, the Information Security Management System. People call it a security plan, looking more at the 800-53 standard. Risk management program is also used. There are many different terms, and it all comes down to the same thing, that you are trying to protect your assets. So why is this such a critical issue in the modern world? As you no doubt know, the probability and cost of breaches is increasing. There's an increased awareness among your customers and clients, no doubt, that is driving an increased demand for compliance in your organization and organizations with which you do business. It's important to note that compliance is a key that helps to open doors for business or other opportunities. Yet, at the same time, looking at security as a whole, the change rate is increasing. So it's always been a changing landscape. Security is tied directly to technology, which has rapidly increased in its change rate over time. Security goes right along with that. So we are having to adapt rapidly to the changing security landscape. And that is the focus of this presentation, is to help you to do that more effectively. So agility is a bit of an ambiguous term sometimes. It can be used in many different instances to make many different points. In this case, agility, I'm defining as the ability to rapidly adjust fire. It's being light on your feet. It is reducing the level of effort that is required to make a change in your organization. So what components of your security program need to be agile? We'll take it from the top. You have program management documentation as a whole. This is above the policies and procedures. This is how your leadership team is going to manage the security program for your organization. Then you get down into policies and procedures and the artifacts that are generated from those documents. Your security solutions that you're using, the technology that is in place, and how you implement that. Also your vendor relationships, and that you need to identify vendors that are also going to be agile. And knowledge, of course, you need to be able to adapt the knowledge within your organization, not just for yourself, but across the different departments in your organization. So how do we do this? First of all, you need to make sure that you are constantly tied in with your leadership team's understanding, making sure that they know that your focus when talking about security is on identifying your assets, performing an inventory of those. That includes physical, technological, to include software and similar licenses, and then to human resource assets and the intangibles, the things like reputation. These are all assets that need protecting. That feeds into risk assessment. You assess the risk to those assets, which then feeds into your control selection or adaptation of existing controls, and that feeds your budget allocation. So, of course, you don't have unlimited money, and what you need to do is make sure that you are prioritizing your financing of security endeavors according to this analysis of risk and the value of the assets being protected. Back to compliance again. Yes, it does win work, but also it's important that leadership bears in mind that security will save the day. In business, there are few things that can absolutely cripple and eliminate organizations. One is, of course, that the demand for whatever services are being provided or products dries up. And it's rare that that will absolutely drive the company out of business, because there are usually multiple products that help to keep the company or other organization afloat. But if there is a security issue that can affect all of the information across your organization, or a majority of it, these types of things are very, very damaging, and they are among the top additional risks that organizations face that can bring an organization to a point where it may no longer be able to function. So going on to more of the how concrete examples, one of the first things that you need to do in your program management is to identify what the most broadly applicable standards are for your organization. This is, of course, assuming that the understanding is there that compliance with a particular security standard will benefit your organization. The point is that even if there isn't a compliance requirement from customers of your organization, it still is important to have a common ground within your organization as far as what you're discussing, what the objectives are for security, what the controls or security measures are defined to be. Otherwise, you could be talking right past each other. You'll have conflicting objectives. So applying standards to your organization. Many of your organizations already have compliance requirements being driven by your customers or laws. And so you'll have these that you need to apply. Use the most broadly applicable as the basis or the core for your policies and procedures, and then make use of the matrices that map the different standards to each other and incorporate those into your documentation, especially the higher level documentation, so that when you need to reference or cross-reference between the different standards, or your customers do when they're reviewing your documentation, it simplifies the process. Not only that, but add the mapping for other standards with which you are most likely to have to comply in the future. It doesn't hurt to add in a few columns for some of the most well-accepted standards for your geographic region. And then you'll be able to have that in place already when and if your scope changes. And on that note, it is important to remember that, as unlikely as it may seem at this point, that your focus, your organization is going to change in the future, it very well could. And it's important to be prepared, because that can really set you back as far as a security program with management of it. And I liken it to insurance company advertisements. The people you'll see will say things like, "I never thought it would happen to me," and then it did. And that's the same sort of thing that I'm talking about here. It's better to be prepared and to have that assurance that your organization and you as an individual are protected in those circumstances. So more of the how, you do, as a high recommendation or top recommendation, you would benefit from keeping your security program management documentation separate from your policy and procedure documents. And that is because the program as a whole can be managed in varying ways over time, and having that as a separate document, the program management or documents as needed, allows you to be more agile in how you are overseeing the program, how you're setting objectives, how you're arranging your input gathering. All these things, if it's not tied down into the policy and procedure documents, then that allows you to go in, change one document quickly. You don't have to worry about updating the rest and sending out the notifications, etc. So try to keep those separate, and then create tiers of your policy and procedure documents. The top tiers should be very high level. Try to avoid specifics as much as possible. You can reference the standards and controls that are being applied, and then show the relationships between those top tier documents and the subordinate documents. And that can be very helpful, especially for customers, to be able to understand how your program is built, to include those diagrams of the relationships between the security and security policy and procedure and artifact type documents. Then make sure that throughout your documentation, anytime that you do have to reference a specific standard, use the tag on there, comma, as amended, because there will always be an updated version that is going to come out in a few years. You don't necessarily want to be tied down just to a particular version, or even the naming convention for standards, because those change as well. Avoid using individuals' names or even the specific titles for their roles. Try to keep even the role definitions generic in those higher level documents, and as much as you can down in the lower ones, because people's roles or titles may change over time. People have added responsibilities or have responsibilities removed, and their titles or roles are adjusted accordingly. And so you don't want to be tied in to those role names or titles throughout your documentation, where you have to go do find and replace through all of them, and then update them, publish them, and notify all of the stakeholders. Also, make sure that you aren't specifying particular solution names. Same type of approach. You want to keep it generic as much as you can. Down in the standard operating procedures, you may need to specify, go to this particular product's portal, and this is how you perform this function. But above that, you really don't necessarily have to specify the names or even subclasses of the types of solutions that are to be used. And then, especially if you have access to some sort of collaboration type tool, but even with products like your Office suites, typically you're able to link between documents, so that it makes it a lot easier to find another location where a change in one document will affect another document. And so you're not left with a partial adjustment to your program as a whole with a change in one document, and then you didn't realize that there's something related in another document that just doesn't make sense when that change has been made. Continuing on through the how, we want to also, as much as possible, use document management solutions. Make sure that there's version control, collaboration with commenting and so on, and subscriber notification built in. You don't have the time to go notify all of the stakeholders every time that there's a change, even a small one, in any of your documents, but the standards and expectations of a lot of customers stipulate that you would notify them. So make sure that you have an automated solution that will notify them, so that you don't have to when you make changes to any of those documents. Also, as much as you can, keep the program management out of your email threads. You will have a much easier time going back to refer to past events documentation if it is in a collaboration type solution, as opposed to an email where you have to hunt through the threads, try to identify what is relevant at what point in time and what's the most recent. Try to keep it out of those, keep it out of email as much as you can. Use a knowledge repository as well. So if you have particularly a need to respond to security questionnaires or RFPs, there are solutions that are available that will enable you to maintain a library of responses to the questions and use AI or similar types of solutions to identify which responses go best with each question or request in the documents coming from external sources or even internal sources. If you're a large enough organization, you may not have to consult with other departments and other regions' offices. So autocomplete, very useful, especially if you're adjusting your program and something is changing in the way that a policy is implemented. Then again, you don't have to make sure that you're going out and making contact with all of the parties that have some sort of interest in the change, each one by one. It enables you to create a much more fluid update to the questionnaires responses, send those out as well. Something else that is a key benefit to using cloud-based solutions or other types of third-party solutions, services that allow them to specialize in a particular area so that you don't have to, It's a transference of risk. You have those options when you're dealing with risks to avoid them, reduce them, accept them, or transfer them. And that transference is usually very effective. If you are starting to use a data center, for instance, or a cloud solution, the protections that they have in place are very well audited, well assessed. They maintain security certifications. It's very easy to verify that they are meeting the standards that you need them to meet. That is something that will take a great load off of your organization and will make you more agile, because when things do change, most likely those third-party organizations are already in a position to provide whatever level of service is required according to the changing scope, expansion or contraction or shifting. And that will, again, result in a reduced level of effort for you and your organization. Try to use external auditors for your assessments of your organization who make use of modern technology, that they will provide an option for you to upload your evidence to a web repository, tie it to the evidence request list items, and maintain that for you over time so that you have a reference point. And it also makes it much easier each time you go through an audit if you're able to go back and reference what was done previously. Again, reducing the level of effort and making it so that you have fewer areas like physical documentation or different shared drive locations and documents throughout those. Just reduces the overall load on you and the organization. Want to make sure, especially if you have a compliance requirement, to have an internal audit program, but also because it is a good idea to always have an internal audit process and program by which you are double checking, making sure that the security measures are operating as they should. Many of the requirements specified for internal audit and standards do not necessarily insist that you cover all of your security measures each year in internal audit. You can break it out over a greater period of time. Generally, what is the maximum acceptable is that you're covering them all every 3 years. So you're doing a third of the controls assessment each year, and you break it up into quarters, you're doing a 12th of the controls each quarter. It's a much more manageable workload for you, especially if you're the primary internal auditor. But even if you have to work with someone who is acting as the auditor and coordinate with them, it helps you to reduce the focused level of effort in a shorter period of time. Make sure that as you're doing internal audit, that you are maintaining evidence in an easy to reference way. Try to organize it by control focus, keep it organized in whatever repository you're using for your evidence in the same way that an external auditor would use that. And that does come in handy in some cases when an external audit is taking place shortly after you perform the same assessments for internal audit. You already have a lot of the evidence that you can provide. And at least over the past several months, then usually it is acceptable to provide something that was not generated the same week as the audit. You can provide something that was generated at least within a few months before the audit. You need to, as you're going to approach the training program for your organization, it helps to bear in mind the same approach, that you want to break out modules with your security program to cover the high-level topics in one module. And then if you need to drill down into more detailed training, then have that as separate modules, because then if something, again, needs to change, then it is a simpler matter to go into the smaller modules and make the adjustments. And if there's a requirement for users to go through the training for that topic after the update, soon after, which is a requirement in many cases for organizations that operate at higher security levels, it is a more simple matter to have them go through a shorter module rather than having to make everyone go through the whole single module again just for a smaller portion that's changed. Focus on testing of all of your adjustments early and often after changes, and then you can decrease the frequency over time. You want to make sure that you're taking advantage of vulnerability scanners, the automation that is possible through many of those to manage your scheduling of vulnerability scans, correlation between them, and then also penetration testing is crucial. It's one thing to have an automated tool that was designed to dig 1 inch deep across the board, across your attack surface for your organization. But a penetration tester is going to come along and see that that digging of 1 inch deep didn't show that if someone just put in a little more effort, they can quickly punch right through a portion of your defenses. And that is what you're dealing with in the real world. It's not as much the just organizations skimming across your attack surface and then moving on to the next target. These days, it's become much easier for organizations to dig a little deeper. They have greater economies of scale and greater experience and higher access to resources. So it's important to contract for penetration testing on a regular basis. And it helps to set up contracts for those to be performed on a particular week, each year, or 6 months, or quarter, as you're able to afford that. And that, of course, creates a tighter continuous feedback loop. All of these enable you to adjust fire more rapidly. And in that aspect, be more agile in your security program. That ties into the who as far as feedback loops. Leadership, of course, it's very difficult to make changes to your organization quickly and to have the support that is required to do so if leadership is not on board. And they can become unfortunately, the greatest obstacles in many cases to adjusting your security program. If it's not tied into what they value, then they're not going to be able to provide the support that you need. So make sure that you're continually tied in, you're continually discussing with them what they value, what their objectives are, and how security and the security program helps them to achieve their objectives. Work with leadership teams, team members to assign risk ownership. That is the ownership of the assets and the security measures protecting those assets. Try to ensure that it's broken out among department heads for assets that are under their control. And then they will break out the ownership further within their departments to individuals who have more hands-on daily interaction with the assets and the security solutions. So as you break this out and move the more granular and repetitive tasks out among the individuals across the organization, this will enable the people at the higher levels to have more bandwidth to make the changes and adjustments and focus that they need to make. develop security champions across the teams as well to greater enhance the feedback that you're getting, tighten those feedback loops, and also to enhance the capability that your organization has to make the changes, to implement change across the organization, to support the policies and procedures that exist and the reasons why they exist. And it's something that is definitely true these days. No one in any organization will ever be harmed by having something related to security on their resumes. Having something related to security will help you to maintain and gain the types of work that we need. And so it's a win-win. They're able to act as those champions in your teams across the organization, and you are able to enhance the organization's ability to adjust fire, to change the culture, and so on. So on that note, I'm going to close up the presentation at this time. If you have any questions, then feel free to reach out to me and the other members of the team at Webcheck Security. You can visit our website at webchecksecurity.com, and we will look forward to assisting you to accomplish your objectives and help you along wherever you are in the path to greater security maturity. Thank you for joining today.